If there's one thing I've learned, it's that life has a funny way of spiraling out of control when you least expect it. And it all started with a simple dinner. I decided to reunite my husband, Jim, with his old college buddies. Seemed innocent enough, right? Just a bunch of grown men reliving their glory days over some backyard barbecue. Oh, how naive I was. We dined in our cozy backyard, the aroma of grilled steaks mixing with the scent of blooming jasmine. Jim and his friends, Mark, Tom, and Dave, were already a few beers in, their laughter echoing through the night. I played the perfect hostess, smiling and nodding at their exaggerated tales of college misadventures. It wasn't long before Mark, with his roguish grin, turned his attention to me. "That's a stunning dress, Lisa. Jim's a lucky man," he said, his eyes lingering a little too long. I felt a thrill shoot through me, a mix of flattery and something more dangerous. "Thank you, Mark," I replied, my voice sweet yet suggestive. If Jim noticed, he didn't show it. After dinner, we moved to the living room for drinks. The mood shifted, becoming more relaxed and intimate. I made sure to sit strategically between Jim and Mark, feeling Mark's knee brush against mine every so often. I could tell he was testing the waters, and I wasn't exactly pulling away. The conversation soon took a turn for the suggestive. "You know, Jim's a lucky guy to have you," Mark teased, his tone dripping with innuendo. I shot him a coy smile and replied, "He knows it." Jim, slightly tipsy, laughed it off, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around us. Then Mark proposed a bet. "Oh, that bet. How about this?" he said, leaning forward with a mischievous glint in his eye. "If Jim's team loses the next game, Lisa has to serve us drinks in something more revealing." My heart skipped a beat, but Jim, ever the confident one, grinned and agreed. He had faith in his team. Fast forward to game day. My husband's team choked, spectacularly. Mark and the others were ecstatic, reminding us of the bet with glee. I feigned reluctance, acting the part of the good wife caught in a naughty predicament. Inside, I was a whirlwind of excitement and nerves. When the next gathering rolled around, I stepped out in a dress so short it barely covered anything. The men's reactions were palpable, hungry eyes and appreciative murmurs. I played the role of the reluctant but amused hostess perfectly, soaking in the attention. As I served drinks, Mark's hand brushed mine, lingering just a second too long. I shot him a look that could melt ice. He smirked, knowing exactly what he was doing. The night was a blur of laughter, teasing, and an electric tension that crackled through the room. And just like that, a simple reunion dinner turned into something far more complicated. I had no idea where this would lead, but one thing was clear. Life as I knew it was about to get a lot more interesting. Poker night. The room was filled with the clinking of glasses and the shuffling of cards. Jim and his friends were in their element, laughter echoing off the walls. I played my role as the perfect hostess, serving drinks with a smile that barely concealed my growing excitement. Mark's eyes followed me, a silent promise in his gaze. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and I reveled in it. As I leaned over to refill Mark's glass, his hand brushed mine, lingering just a bit longer than necessary. I didn't pull away. Instead, I met his eyes with a knowing look, feeling a rush of adrenaline. The flirting escalated, each touch and glance more daring than the last. Jim, blissfully oblivious, was too engrossed in his cards to notice the silent dance happening right under his nose. Later, as the night wound down and the others were distracted, Mark cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes burned with intensity. "Lisa, we both know there's something between us," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. "I want you. I think you want me too." My heart pounded in my chest. The sensible part of me screamed to back away, but the thrill of the forbidden was too strong. I didn't reject him outright. Instead, I gave a slight nod, fueling his confidence. He smiled, a predator sensing victory. A few days later, I found myself in a secluded bar, waiting for Mark. The dim lighting and hushed atmosphere made it the perfect setting for our clandestine meeting. When he arrived, the tension was palpable. We shared a few drinks, the conversation laced with innuendo and unspoken desire. By the time we left, my heart was racing. In the parking lot, Mark pulled me into a passionate kiss. It was electrifying, a mix of fear and excitement that left me breathless. We parted reluctantly, each step away from him feeling like tearing a part of myself. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I met frequently, always in secret locations. Our text messages were heated, filled with promises of stolen moments. Each clandestine kiss and hurried encounter was more daring than the last. The thrill of secrecy heightened everything, making each touch feel more intense. One afternoon, we skipped work and checked into a hotel. The experience was exhilarating, a heady mix of fear and excitement. We were like teenagers again, exploring each other with a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. As we lay together afterwards, I knew I was in too deep, but the pull of the affair was too strong to resist. We parted ways, both eager for our next meeting. Our encounters became riskier. We met in places where we could easily be seen, adding to the thrill. The danger of being caught only intensified our connection. Every stolen moment, every shared glance, was charged with electricity. It was intoxicating, a drug I couldn't get enough of. At home, I maintained the facade of a loving wife. I cooked, cleaned, and smiled in all the right places, but the guilt gnawed at me. Jim's trusting eyes were a constant reminder of my betrayal. Yet, the thrill of the affair was too addictive to stop. The dual life I led was exhilarating, the highs and lows blending into a constant state of arousal and fear. Each day, I balanced on a knife's edge, the danger and excitement consuming my every thought. The guilt was always there, lurking in the background, but the thrill overshadowed it. I knew it couldn't last forever, but for now, the rush of living on the edge was too intoxicating to let go. Life had become a high-wire act, balancing thrill and guilt with every step. The secret meetings with Mark, the stolen kisses, the hushed conversations, each moment was electric. But reality, ever the killjoy, began to rear its ugly head. Jim, sweet and clueless Jim, started noticing my frequent absences and late-night texts. "Who are you always texting?" he asked one night, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I laughed it off, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just the girls, planning another brunch," I said, adding an eye roll for good measure. He seemed to buy it, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. I had to get smarter. My phone became a landmine of potential disaster, so I started deleting messages and using cash for our secret hotel rooms. Each encounter with Mark required meticulous planning. I couldn't afford any slip-ups. The thrill was intoxicating, but the stakes were high. Then came the close call. I was on the phone with Mark, our conversation a mix of flirty banter and whispered promises, when Jim walked in unexpectedly. I nearly jumped out of my skin, fumbling to end the call. "Who was that?" he asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. "Just Sarah, talking about our next girls' night," I lied smoothly. He didn't press further, but the close call left me shaken. Desperate to keep my secrets safe, I enlisted my best friend, Megan, as an alibi. "We're going to need to have more girls' nights," I told her, flashing my most convincing smile. She agreed, albeit reluctantly, blissfully unaware of the real reason behind my sudden enthusiasm for girl time. Mark and I decided to switch to burner phones. It added another layer of secrecy to our affair, making it all the more thrilling. The clandestine nature of our relationship had me hooked. Every text, every call on that cheap, disposable phone sent a jolt of excitement through me. We were like spies in our own little world of deceit. At a work event, things took an unexpected turn. I ran into Dave, one of Jim's friends, who was also having an affair. We exchanged knowing glances, an unspoken bond forming over our shared secrets. It was bizarrely comforting to know I wasn't alone in my deception. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Mark's jealousy began to rear its head. He hated seeing me interact with other men, especially his friends. His possessiveness added a new, complicated layer to our relationship. One night, after a particularly heated argument about my harmless banter with Tom, I found myself questioning the whole affair. Was it worth the risk? Yet, the thought of ending it felt like tearing out a piece of my soul. The thrill, the danger, the intoxicating rush of living a double life, it was all too addictive. I was trapped in a web of my own making, unable to stop even as the walls began to close in. Every day was a new challenge, a new puzzle piece to fit into my intricate lie. The tension at home grew thicker, Jim's suspicion more apparent. I had to be sharper, more careful. The stakes were too high to falter now. As much as I hated to admit it, the danger made it all the more thrilling. The unraveling had begun, and I was caught in the center, trying to keep the pieces of my life from crashing down around me. Life had taken on a frantic, dizzying pace, and I was loving every second of it. The heightened passion between Mark and me was like fuel to a fire. Our encounters grew more intense, exploring fantasies I hadn't even dared to dream about before. It was thrilling, electrifying, and terrifying all at once. We pushed boundaries, deepening our connection with every secret touch and whispered promise. Then Mark proposed something daring: a weekend getaway. We'd pretend to be on business trips and spend the weekend in a secluded cabin. The thought alone sent shivers down my spine. I told Jim about the fake conference, spinning a tale so detailed it could have been a novel. He bought it, hook, line, and sinker. The cabin was perfect, nestled deep in the woods where no one would find us. We indulged in each other without restraint, a 2-day escape from reality. It was magical, but the fantasy couldn't last forever. During one of our clandestine meetings, disaster struck. We were at a bar, tucked away in a corner booth, when Tom walked in. My heart stopped as he approached our table, his eyes wide with shock. "Lisa, Mark?" he stammered. I tried to play it cool, but the look on his face told me we were busted. Tom, however, had a different agenda. After the initial shock wore off, he pulled me aside. "I'll keep your secret," he said, a sly smile playing on his lips. "But it'll cost you." And just like that, I was blackmailed into a similar arrangement with Tom. The nerve of that guy. He threatened to reveal everything to Jim if I didn't comply. I had no choice, and so the deception deepened. Juggling both Mark and Tom became a complicated dance. Each encounter was fraught with danger, but the thrill of it all kept me going. It was like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, and I was addicted to the rush. My life had become a soap opera, and I was the star. But the tension at home was growing. Jim's suspicions were like a dark cloud hanging over me. He noticed every little thing. The missed calls, the secretive texts, the late nights. The stress of maintaining the facade was starting to take its toll. I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. The final straw came when I had to miss our anniversary dinner. Mark had planned an elaborate night, and there was no backing out. I concocted an elaborate lie about a work emergency, complete with fake emails and frantic phone calls. Jim bought it, but the guilt was overwhelming. Sitting in the dimly lit restaurant with Mark, I couldn't shake the image of Jim sitting alone at our anniversary dinner. It gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the double life I was leading. But I couldn't stop. The thrill was too addictive, the danger too tantalizing. Back home, the tension was palpable. Jim's questions became more pointed, his trust in me eroding. Every smile, every laugh felt forced, a mask hiding the turmoil inside. I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. One night, lying in bed next to Jim, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How long could I keep this up? The lies, the secrets, the constant fear of getting caught, it was all too much. But the thought of giving it all up, of returning to the mundane reality, was unbearable. The tightrope was fraying, the pit of vipers below becoming clearer with every step. I was in too deep, and there was no turning back. The unraveling had begun, and I was left to navigate the tangled web I had woven. The unraveling had finally started to show at the seams. Jim's suspicions had reached their peak, leading to a confrontation I knew was inevitable but dreaded nonetheless. "Lisa, what's going on with you?" Jim's voice was tense, his eyes searching mine for a truth I wasn't ready to reveal. I felt the familiar pang of guilt, but I couldn't let him see it. "Jim, it's just work. The new project is eating up all my time," I lied smoothly, adding a hint of exasperation for good measure. He didn't seem convinced, but he let it go, for now. The damage, though, was done. Trust, once cracked, is never quite the same. As if my life wasn't complicated enough, enter Dave. Another one of Jim's friends who, sensing the growing tension between Jim and me, decided it was the perfect time to pry. He approached me at a barbecue, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "I couldn't help but notice things seem a bit off with you and Jim. Maybe I can help. Take your mind off things," he suggested, his tone dripping with innuendo. The nerve, but desperate times call for desperate measures. I reluctantly accepted his indecent proposal, adding yet another layer to my already tangled web of deceit. Juggling 3 affairs became a logistical nightmare. Mark, Tom, and now Dave. all demanding more time and attention than I could afford. Keeping them all satisfied while maintaining the facade of a dutiful wife stretched me to my limits. My life was a series of carefully timed texts, secret rendezvous, and hastily constructed alibis. One slip, and it would all come crashing down. At a mutual friend's party, I had one of those near-miss moments that left my heart pounding. I was flirting with Mark, a casual brush of the hand, a lingering gaze, when I realized Jim was just across the room. He didn't notice, but the close call heightened my anxiety. I was playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before I got burned. Mark, ever the thrill-seeker, arranged a risky rendezvous at Jim's workplace during off hours. The sheer audacity of it was intoxicating. We sneaked into his office, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt of adrenaline through me. The fear of getting caught so close to home was both terrifying and exhilarating. Then came the close quarters at home. Jim's business trip got cancelled at the last minute, throwing a wrench in my plans. Mark and I had to improvise, meeting in the most mundane places just to steal a moment together. The tension at home was palpable, with Jim's suspicions growing by the day. The final straw came in the form of a stupid, careless mistake. In a moment of distraction, I sent a flirtatious text meant for Mark to Jim. Realizing my blunder, I quickly covered it up, crafting an elaborate excuse about a work friend and an inside joke. Jim seemed to buy it, but the close call left me rattled. One more slip up, and everything would fall apart. As I lay in bed that night, my mind raced. How much longer could I keep this up? The lies, the deceit, the constant fear of getting caught, it was all too much. Yet, the thought of giving it all up was unbearable. The thrill, the excitement, the escape from the mundane reality of my marriage. I was addicted to it all. But even I knew that every high has a come down. The turning point had arrived, and I was caught in the eye of the storm, desperately trying to keep my head above water. The trust between Jim and me was severely damaged, the lies were piling up, and the thrill was becoming overshadowed by the fear of inevitable discovery. The question was, how long could I keep up the charade before everything came crashing down? Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, Tom decided to turn up the heat. His boldness was getting out of hand. He started leaving suggestive messages on my voicemail, stupid, reckless stuff that Jim could easily stumble upon. One evening, I caught Jim staring at my phone, a perplexed look on his face. My heart nearly stopped. "What's that?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "Oh, just a telemarketer," I said with a forced laugh, grabbing my phone and heading to the kitchen. I called Tom later, my voice a sharp whisper. "You need to be more discreet, Tom. This isn't a game." He laughed it off, but I wasn't amused. This wasn't just a risky thrill anymore, it was turning into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. And then there was Dave. Frustrated with the secrecy, he pulled me aside during a group outing and demanded a public display of affection. "Come on, Lisa, just a kiss, right here," he whispered, his hand squeezing mine. The nerve, but I had no choice. In a secluded corner, I kissed him quickly, hoping no one noticed. The whole time, my heart pounded in my chest, terrified someone would see. Jim's friendships were starting to strain under the weight of my affairs. He noticed the odd behavior of his friends, the way they avoided his eyes, the awkward silences, but he didn't connect the dots. Not yet, anyway. I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes, and it tore at me. But what could I do? I was too far gone. Balancing this double life was becoming a Herculean task. My performance at work suffered. I missed deadlines, forgot important meetings, and my boss was starting to notice. At home, I missed family events and made lame excuses that only fueled Jim's suspicions. I was drowning, and the water was getting deeper. Mark, sweet, possessive Mark, was growing frustrated. "I can't keep doing this, Lisa," he said during one of our stolen moments. "We need to come clean, leave our partners." I shook my head, panic rising in my throat. "No, Mark, we can't. The fallout would be too much." He sighed, the tension between us palpable. He wanted more, but I couldn't give it to him. Not without destroying everything. And then came the trap. Jim announced he was going on a business trip, but something in his tone felt off. I should have been more careful, but the opportunity to meet Mark was too tempting. Jim had hired a private investigator, suspecting infidelity. I was so blind, wrapped up in my lies and deceit, that I walked right into it. The investigator caught us in the act, snapping photos that left no room for doubt. When Jim confronted me with the evidence, his face was a mask of devastation. He didn't scream or rage, he just looked at me with those broken eyes, and it shattered me. I knew something was off, he said quietly. But this. I had no words, nothing to say that could make it better. He bided his time, planning his next move, while I lived in a state of constant dread. The trap had sprung, and I was caught, tangled in the very web I'd woven. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized the full extent of my downfall. My double life was crumbling around me, and there was no way out. The thrill was gone, replaced by an all-consuming fear. The unraveling had begun, and I was at the center, helpless as everything I knew and loved fell apart. If you think a secret affair is exciting, wait until it all comes crashing down. The confrontation happened on a quiet Sunday morning. Jim had been eerily calm since confronting me with the evidence. But that morning, his calm broke. "Lisa," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and pain, "I want a divorce." There it was, laid out like a death sentence. I was forced to admit everything. The household erupted in chaos, shouting, crying, accusations flying like shrapnel. Jim's face was a mask of betrayal and hurt, and I had nothing left but hollow apologies. The next day, Jim confronted his friends. He revealed my betrayal, and their reactions were priceless: shock, shame, and anger. Tom and Dave were left stammering, their faces pale. Mark looked like he'd been punched in the gut. The friendships were over in an instant, shattered by my actions. Word spread quickly among our social circle. I became a pariah, the topic of whispered conversations and judgmental glances. The humiliation was unbearable. Friends I'd known for years avoided me, their eyes full of disdain. The scandal consumed my life, and there was no escaping it. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare. Jim's lawyer, a shark in a suit, used the affair as leverage, aiming for a favorable settlement. Every meeting was a battle, and I felt like I was losing everything: my home, my security, my dignity. And then there was Mark. I thought we had something real, but when his own relationship started to crumble, he distanced himself from me. "I can't do this, Lisa," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. "I need to focus on fixing things with my wife." Just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone to face the fallout. Tom and Dave followed suit. They didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Their calls and texts stopped, and I was left isolated, without allies. The loneliness was suffocating, and the realization of my actions hit me like a ton of bricks. With the divorce finalized, I was forced to start over. I moved to a new city, seeking a fresh start away from the scandal and shame. It was a daunting challenge, but what choice did I have? My old life was in ruins, and all I could do was pick up the pieces and try to rebuild. As I settled into my new life, I couldn't help but reflect on the choices that led me here. The thrill, the excitement, the deceit, it had all seemed worth it at the time. But now, with everything stripped away, I saw the truth. I had destroyed my marriage, my friendships, and my reputation for a fleeting sense of adventure. The cost was far too high. Every day was a struggle to move forward. The whispers and judgmental glances were gone, replaced by the cold indifference of strangers in a new city. But in that indifference, I found a strange sort of solace. No one knew my past, and I had a chance to start over. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. As I looked out over the unfamiliar skyline, I took a deep breath and made a promise to myself. I would learn from my mistakes, rebuild my life, and find a way to forgive myself. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to face it head on. After all, what other choice did I have? They say life comes full circle, and in my case, it was like being on a roller coaster that just wouldn't stop. I found a job and a small apartment in the city, trying to rebuild my life from scratch. The loneliness was suffocating, and the silence of my new place felt like a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. But I pushed forward, determined to move on. One evening, as I was settling into my new routine, my phone buzzed. It was Mark. My heart skipped a beat. He was now divorced and seeking forgiveness, wanting to rekindle our affair. Temptation pulled at me, but I was wary. Could I really go down that road again? After much contemplation, I decided to meet him. We sat in a quiet cafe, the tension between us thick. We discussed our past, the mistakes we made, and the possibility of a future together. It was tense but strangely hopeful. Yet, the wounds were still fresh, and I wasn't sure if I could trust him, or myself, again. As if my life wasn't complicated enough, Jim reached out to finalize the divorce proceedings. He was remarried now, and our encounter was cold, filled with lingering bitterness. There were no apologies, no closure, just a necessary legal formality that left me feeling more empty than ever. Despite my past, I decided to dip my toes back into the dating scene. Each new relationship was approached with caution, the fear of repeating past mistakes looming over every interaction. It was hard to let go of the paranoia and mistrust that had become my constant companions. Then came the unexpected twist. Jim's new wife contacted me. She revealed his continued infidelity, and we formed an unlikely alliance. We plotted to expose him, driven by a shared desire for revenge. It was risky, but the thought of bringing him down fueled our actions. We set a trap, gathering evidence of his infidelity. It was nerve-wracking, and I felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff. But the desire for revenge was too strong to ignore. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. At a family gathering, we exposed Jim's infidelity, causing a massive fallout. His new marriage was in jeopardy, and his reputation tarnished. The scandal attracted public attention, and Jim lost his job and social standing, becoming a pariah like I once was. The satisfaction of revenge was fleeting. Reflecting on my actions, I realized the experience had made me stronger. It was a harsh lesson, but it taught me resilience and the importance of moving forward. With my past behind me, I focused on new opportunities. I started a business, channeling my energy into something positive. The journey of rebuilding was slow but rewarding. I forged new friendships, surrounding myself with supportive and trustworthy people. Seeking closure, I met Mark one last time. We parted ways amicably, understanding that our relationship was a product of circumstances. It was time to move forward and leave the past behind. Embracing change, I found strength in my newfound independence. The journey of self-discovery continued, shaping my future decisions. The lessons learned from the affair guided me towards a more fulfilling